There's a knocking at the gate. The drunk porter goes to open it, talking about how he feels like he's the gatekeeper to hell, little knowing that his comments made in jest are quite close to the truth. In come the lords, and then there's the discovery of Duncan's body. Will Macbeth and Lady Macbeth be able to keep it together when their crime is publicly seen for the first time? That's what we find out in Act 2, Scene 3 of Macbeth. Like this video, subscribe to the channel and sign up on my platform where you can do an activity with an AI tutor to test your understanding of this video after you've watched it. Now, the knocking at the gate actually began back in Act 2, Scene 2, when Macbeth and his wife were together after the crime, and there was this thunderous noise coming, and Macbeth at the time was looking at his hands and thinking, what have I done? And at that point it wasn't clear whether this knocking was another hallucination of Macbeth's or whether it was actually taking place in the real world. Remember, so far Macbeth has hallucinated a dagger before him. He's hallucinated voices crying out that he's murdered sleep. So it would kind of make sense for there to be another hallucination now about knocking. Perhaps someone knocking at the door to want to know what's going on inside. Maybe the fear of discovery by someone banging and trying to open the secret. And it's not until Act 2, Scene 3 that we find out that this is actually a knocking in the real world. But by now, Shakespeare has masterfully made the audience unsure of what to expect. Are we going to see on the stage sounds and visions that are actually there, or are we going to hear and see things that are taking place in Macbeth's head? He's blurred the line between reality and imagination. And what that does is it creates this kind of nightmarish atmosphere, which is supposed to mimic what Macbeth is feeling inside him. It's a master stroke by Shakespeare in creating this disturbing environment and atmosphere. After the drama of the previous scene, the porter's role here is to provide what's known as comic relief. The tension, which was incredibly high with the murder, drops a little bit, and there's the opportunity for the audience to laugh at some of the porter's crude jokes. But he's not just there to make the audience laugh. In fact, his comments have a deeper significance. He's a bit like the role of the fool in early modern drama. The fool was a character who would say funny things, who would make other characters and the audience laugh, and would have the license to speak truths that the noble characters would never get to say. And that's exactly what happens with the porter here. First of all, he's very different from the other characters, which you can see very easily if you're reading the play, because everything he says is in lines of prose, whereas the other characters, the nobles, speak in iambic pentameter. And then, on top of that, he's making comments about how he feels like porter of hell gate, right? I am the gatekeeper to the gate of hell. Now, if you've been watching and paying attention, you would think, well, you're not so far from the mark there, Mr. Porter, because actually, inside, Lady Macbeth had called up spirits from hell, and Macbeth has just committed a hellish crime. So there's something quite truthful about what he's saying. He imagines that he's letting in lots of different imaginary people to hell. And one of them, he says he's letting in, is an equivocator. Here's an equivocator that could swear in both the scales against either scale, who committed treason enough for God's sake, yet could not equivocate to heaven. Oh, come in, equivocator. Now, an equivocator is someone who uses language with double meanings in order to deceive people. And he might get away with that on Earth, but the porter points out that you can't get away with that when it comes to judgment from God. And Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are characters who have been equivocating. They've been using language to trick people. And the porter's comments that you can't get away with that with God are really important because they remind the audience that something anti-Christian has happened here and that there's going to be divine punishment for it. So the porter's role is on the one hand humorous, but on the other hand touching much deeper themes. Why has Shakespeare done this? Well, I think there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, as I said before, he's got this license to speak truths and to comment on the action of the play that the characters within the action can't really do. That's not only what the fool from early modern drama would do, but that's actually something that stretches back as long ago as the ancient Greeks. In Greek tragedy, you would have the chorus, who was a group of singers and dancers who would come on between the main action scenes and would tell you about what's going on in the play and perhaps what to think about it. And the porter really occupies that role here. But I think there's a second reason why Shakespeare has put this porter in. And it's this. This porter, he's a commoner. He doesn't speak like the nobles. He's much more simple in his outlook. But even he has some kind of subconscious inkling about what's going on. He's able to talk and say, I feel like the gatekeeper to hell. And the suggestion is that if even a lowly porter can on some level work out what's happening, then this must be a really enormous crime. And also it shows the precariousness of Macbeth's position. If the porter can work it out, what chance does Macbeth have of tricking the lords into believing that he's innocent? It really shows you the fine line he's got to tread, and it starts to build the tension for what's coming at the same time as dropping the tension and allowing the audience to laugh. When Macduff and Lennox come in, they talk about what a rough night it's been. Lennox says, our chimneys were blown down, lamentings heard in the air, strange screams of death. The obscure bird clamoured the livelong night. Some say the earth was feverous and did shake. So there's been a massive storm, owls have been hooting all night, there's even been an earthquake. Now, to understand what's going on here, you need to understand a little bit about the Great Chain of Being. The Great Chain of Being was an early modern belief system, a cosmological belief system about the structure of the whole universe. It actually came about in the medieval times, but it carried on well into the early modern period. And the idea is that the whole of the universe is made up of a hierarchy, with God at the top, all the way down to minerals at the bottom. So you've got God, and then you've got archangels, and then you've got angels, then you've got humans, animals, birds, fish, trees, plants, all the way down to rocks and minerals. And within those different realms, you know, the divine realm, the human realm, the animal realm, you've also got a hierarchy inside each realm. So in the animal realm, you've got things like lions as the kings of the animals, and in the bird realm you've got eagles, and in the human realm you've got the king or the monarch at the top, and then you've got the nobles, and then you've got the commoners. So everything has its place in the hierarchy. And what the early modern mind believed was that if there was a disruption in one realm, so for example, if there was a disruption in the human realm, then that would be felt in other realms, such as the natural realm. And here we've got a massive disruption. The king has been killed. The king at the top of the hierarchy has been killed by Macbeth, who is underneath him. He's a noble. He should know his place. He should stay there. But he's disrupted the Great Chain of Being. And that's felt in the natural world, where there is disruption. There's an earthquake. There are strange screams. The owl has been hooting. Things are not right in the natural world, and that's a correspondence to what's happened in the human world. You should learn that word correspondence. It's a great word to use when you're writing about this concept of the Great Chain of Being and how the early moderns believed that there were correspondences between different realms. And you can see that here. So it would make complete sense to the Jacobean audience to hear Lennox say, "My young remembrance cannot parallel a fellow to it. I've never known a night as rough as this." Of course, because the king has been killed. There's been an act of regicide. So yeah, of course there would be earthquakes. Those signs to the early modern mind, those natural phenomena that we would now just see as geographical events, were to them signs of ill omen. So to the backdrop of the porter's cacklings and Lennox's comments on how everything seems chaotic, we get the discovery of the body. In come Macduff and Lennox, and Macbeth leads them towards Duncan's chamber where he knows the body is lying dead. And depending on the way an actor plays it, we can see Macbeth at this moment being either more or less in control. Out goes Macduff to the chamber, and he comes back on stage, and his language shows the extent of the disruption to the great chain of being. He says,
"Most sacrilegious murder hath broke up the Lord's anointed temple and stole thence the life of the building."
Now what he's saying is that God's chosen one, and the Jacobeans believed that God chose the king, and Macduff says God's chosen one has been killed. And the metaphor he uses is that the body of the king is like God's temple. And so by killing the king, what you've done is you've broken open the temple of God. And he refers to it as sacrilege, which is a crime against God. And that would make complete sense to Jacobeans. The king was the one chosen by God, and if you murder the king, it's not just a crime against another human, it's a crime against God. And it's an immediate reminder to the Christian audience that there's going to be spiritual repercussions for what Macbeth has done. In comes Lady Macbeth. She's saying what's going on, trying to pretend that she doesn't know what's happened. And Macduff, in a moment of enormous dramatic irony, says,
"O gentle lady, 'tis not for you to hear what I can speak. The repetition in a woman's ear would murder as it fell."
If I were to tell you what had happened, because you're a woman, you'd die on hearing it. Now, he's just taking her for the stereotypical early modern woman, isn't he? He thinks she is frail and weak and won't be able to deal with this kind of news. But of course we know that she's one of the driving forces behind what has happened. So the dramatic irony there really shows you that these characters are not even willing to entertain the idea that a woman could be involved in such a crime. And his comments really show you the enormous gap between stereotypes and the reality of Lady Macbeth as a dark woman. So doing their best to pretend they haven't just committed this crime, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are asking lots of questions about what's going on. So far, so deceptive. But Macbeth goes off the stage to see the body for the first time himself. And when he comes back on, he seems much more perturbed. In fact, we find out that while he was looking at the body, he took the daggers that were there by the grooms, by Duncan's servants, and he murdered the servants on the spot, an act of massive violence in front of Macduff. And he also says when he comes back in,
"Had I but died an hour before this chance, I had lived a blessed time. The wine of life is drawn."
And what he's saying there is, I wish I'd died just an hour ago, because then I'd have had a blessed life, a life, blessed by God. And what he's supposed to be making the Lords believe is that he's incredibly sad that Duncan has died and that he'll never feel the same again. But of course, to the audience, there's a whole different level to his words. We can listen to him, and he also kind of seems to be saying, if only I had died an hour ago, I wouldn't have committed this crime and I would still be blessed. I would still be in touch with God. And there's this sense that he's kind of trying to reveal, without revealing it to the Lords, his feelings of regret. He's kind of trying to hold it together, but will he be able to do so? The next speech he makes, when Macduff says, "Why did you kill those guards?" is a moment where he seems to disintegrate even further. He says,
"Here lay Duncan, his silver skin laced with his golden blood, and his gash stabs looked like a breach in nature."
His language shows his deep respect for Duncan, the silver skin, the golden blood. He sees Duncan as incredibly precious. And we are able to listen to him and think, wow, that's such vivid imagery that it seems like it comes from a place of real care and love for the king that he's killed. So again, there's this sense that he's trying to make the Lord see why he would have killed the guards, but he's actually at the same time trying to disburden himself of his guilt and is showing some sense of regret. Now, of course, murdering the guards was not part of the plan. Lady Macbeth had said, they've got to seem like they're responsible for it. So why would he go and kill them? Well, you might think that he panicked because he might have thought, they're going to wake up and they're going to defend themselves. They're going to say they didn't do it. Maybe they even saw me do it. I better kill them. Or it might be another example to a psychologist of what we were talking about in a previous video of this idea of projection. Remember the idea of projection? When somebody puts onto someone else the nasty feelings that they can't tolerate about themselves? Well, perhaps this is an example of Macbeth feeling so terrible about having killed Duncan that he projects it onto the guards and murders them in violence, being like, ah! Because he can't deal with what he's done, and he puts it onto them instead. We don't actually know whether he's done this because he wants to shut up the guards or because of some deeper psychological reason. But what's obvious is that this wasn't part of the plan, and he seems slightly out of control, not only in that action, but also in the way he's talking. And what happens next? Lady Macbeth faints. Now, to the lords, this would be the expected thing for a woman to do. She's heard that the king has died. Oh, I can't handle it. And she faints. But of course, to the audience, there could be other reasons why she might have fainted. One of them might be that she's realised that her husband has messed up. He's not followed the plan. And, oh God, my husband's got it all wrong. Ooh, and she faints. But perhaps a more persuasive reason for her fainting is that she's realised that Macbeth is about to give himself away. He's out of control with his body and with his words, and perhaps she fake faints in order to draw the attention away from him. Which works because the lords turn to her, they look to the lady, and so his comments and his behaviour are sort of pushed into the background. And this would make sense, wouldn't it? She's always been the one in control, so it would really fit for her to be the one who's staying in control and keeping it together here and making sure that they don't get caught. It's really great how Shakespeare has first this private scene where Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are dealing with the fact that there's this murder that he's committed, and then this very public scene. Shakespeare loves to do that in this play. He juxtaposes a private scene with a public scene immediately afterwards, and you get to see the characters and how they behave differently in different environments. But what you actually see in this pair of scenes is that the behaviour of the two of them is quite similar. Macbeth was looking at his hands and was struggling to keep it together in private, and now he seems to be struggling to keep it together in public. And Lady Macbeth was the one who was controlling things and pushing them forwards and making sure the plan worked in private, and now she's doing the same in public. So there we are. Shakespeare shows you these characters in different settings and shows you how they behave in different environments. Meanwhile, most of the lords seem extremely sceptical about what's going on. Lennox says, "Those of his chamber, as it seemed, had done it." So it looks like the guards did it, but notice his phrase, "as it seemed." It seemed like they did it, which kind of implies that maybe he thinks they didn't actually do it and that it's just a setup. Macduff questions why Macbeth killed the guards. He says, "Wherefore did you do so?" And that prompts Macbeth into this nervous moment where he almost gives the game away. Malcolm, who's the heir to the throne and the eldest son of Duncan, and his brother Donalbain, the second son of Duncan, start talking in asides, and they say they don't trust anybody. They say,
"Where we are, there's daggers in men's smiles. The near in blood, the nearer bloody."
There's daggers in men's smiles. Remember that idea of looking nice, looking like the innocent flower, but being the serpent under it? Well, the idea of smiling, but there being daggers in the smiles is really a very similar idea, isn't it? It's this whole theme of deception. And Malcolm and Donalbain seem to be aware of this. They think they can't trust anybody, and they decide to run away, which in the short term makes them look like culprits. In fact, in the next scene, it said, oh, they ran away, so they look like they did it. But in the longer term, it was the right decision. It enables them to go off to get an army together and to come back and to try and reclaim the throne. So they're sceptical and they make decisions to protect themselves. And even Banquo is incredibly sceptical. He says, "Let us meet and question this most bloody piece of work to know it further. Fears and and scruples shake us. In the great hand of God I stand, and thence against the undivulged pretence I fight of treasonous malice. He wants to question things. He says it's treason and malice. He says it's evil. And he also uses the word pretense, he says there's some pretending going on here. So even Banquo is kind of sceptical about what's going on. And again, he says, in the great hand of God, I stand. He turns towards God as he has done previously. And it shows that he's a foil to Macbeth. Macbeth behaves in evil ways, and Banquo consistently turns back towards God. So again, we see that juxtaposition between Macbeth and Banquo. And that's it. All of these lords seem completely unsettled, mistrustful and sceptical about what's happened. It really shows what a difficult position Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are in. So it's another incredibly dramatic scene with the tension dipping with the porter's jokes and then rising with the discovery of the body. And why has Shakespeare done this? Well, he's done it to show what might happen in the immediate aftermath of the murder of a king. There's chaos and there's lots of frantic running around. There's many exits and entries in this scene. There's also lots of short lines of dialogue showing the kind of frenetic nature of the pace and really feeding into this Jacobean idea about how when there's a disruption to the great chain of being, everything becomes incredibly chaotic. There's been an earthquake in the night and there's been an earthquake in the political realm.